American Thanksgiving is upon us, and you better hope your team is in a playoff spot, because if they are, they have a 76.7% chance of making the playoffs. Now, over the course of 8 full seasons in the past 10 years, not including the COVID years, we saw a total of 30 out of 240 teams make the playoffs after being outside the playoff picture at Thanksgiving, which comes to just 12.5%. So with all that said, Thanksgiving brings us a very quirky schedule as well to go over. So let's jump right into the schedule as we always do. Now for week 8, a staggering 59 games this week. So 24 teams play 4 times, 6 play 3 games, and Toronto and Edmonton only play twice. So let's hope you're facing McDavid, Draisaitl, Marner, Nylander, etc. this week. Last week, it was a difficult week to face those guys as they had 4 games. This week, it's only 2. And another scheduling note, there are 0 games on American Thanksgiving, so we get to watch some absolutely garbage football games. And that also means that there's only 2 light nights this week, Tuesday and Sunday. Tuesday with 2 games, Sunday with 5. So 3 teams play on both of those nights and have 4 games. You're looking at Boston, Montreal, and Vancouver. Some matchups are more favorable than others, and we'll get into some of the waiver ads this week, but you got Boston on the road against the Islanders. They've got Pittsburgh at home, and they've got Montreal at home. So a bunch of winnable games after this coaching change. They should get some sort of a bounce from the coaching change, even though Joe Sacco has been in charge of their special teams, which is abysmal, and he's been there for a number of years, so he's not necessarily a fresh new voice, but teams usually do get that bounce after a coaching change. With that said, you've got Montreal. Both of these teams, all 3 of these teams actually have that Tuesday, Wednesday back-to-back, but you're going to have to face a back-to-back somewhere in here. They've got Utah at home. They go on the road against Columbus. Then they've got the road back-to-back in New York and in Boston. That's going to be a little bit more difficult than some of these other schedules. Then you've got Vancouver. They've got Boston on the road. They've got Pittsburgh on the road. They've got Buffalo on the road and Detroit. So some winnable games here, but a 4-game road trip for Vancouver. And they're missing a couple of their top guys, which does mean that a lot of their top 6 players are available, and we'll get into that as we move forward in the video. And then down below, these are all the Sunday games. So these are games that you're probably going to want to target maybe on Thursday, maybe on Friday or Saturday as you look to try to cap out your week and find those games on Sunday to try to push you over the top in your matchups. You've got Vancouver, Detroit, you've got Chicago, Columbus, you've got Montreal, Boston, the Jets and the Stars. That'll be a really good game. And then you've got the Senators and the Ducks. So some of these games are set up for more scoring, like the Blue Jackets and the Hawks, the Senators and the Ducks, maybe even this Vancouver-Detroit game. These games I would assume would be a little bit lower scoring, probably mainly because the Bruins have to tighten it up defensively. But with all that said, there are a number of players that you can grab this week, but there are a couple of caveats. If you grab any of these other guys that have 4 games, but only the 1 light night or no light nights, then it's going to be difficult to get them into your roster. So for the waiver ads this week, let's start by going over the Boston Bruins. Now with these guys, there's not a whole lot in terms of waiver ads because nobody's going right now. You can see here Pastrnak, he's under a point per game, 18 points in 21 games, 5 on the power play. 4.1 shots is nice, but still about 8.9 points per game. Marchand, 14 points in 21. That's a little underwhelming. At least he's shooting the puck 3 shots per game. These guys are obviously owned up. So as we zoom in and try to find some guys on the waiver wire, maybe your best ad is Elias Lindholm, but he's only got 10 points in 21, 4 on the power play. He does get some hits and blocks, 1.7 hits, 1.2 blocks per game, so at least you're getting that, but he has been underwhelming. Now would be a good time to float a buy low trade offer on Charlie McAvoy, only 7 points, but the peripherals are there, 2 shots, 1.7 hits, 1.4 blocks per game. So he's a guy that I own. I've been looking to offload him for a while because of the offensive production, but if you're looking for some buy low opportunities, I would definitely favor that. You do have Nikita Zadorov. He's been hitting 2.9 hits per game. 1.3 shots is a little low, but he is pretty, at least he's on this goals below expected list in terms of he should have at least 1 goal by now. Trent Frederick had a 2-goal game in the past week or so, 6 points on the year, so maybe not the best ad, but maybe all you have this week. Morgan Geekie getting top line exposure this week, only 4 points in 16, 1.3 hits is at least manageable for a 1% owned player with dual eligibility. But again, not a whole lot to roster this week in terms of guys that you can find on the waiver wire. So let's start by looking at Morgan Geekie, who is getting that line assignment. The point per game is very low, 0.25. Shots per game also pretty low, 1.63. I guess he has a power play point, but really nothing to speak of there. 1.31 hits is okay, and he has been trending up. I guess that's the good news, but he doesn't even make the cutoff for my trending players, which I cut off at 35. So very low performance from Geeky. He is dual eligible, and he should be there for you in any kind of league size, but and he should break out soon. Minus 2.8 goals above expected, but even with that, that would put him at 4 or 5 goals on the year. It's not going to be anything impressive. So with that said, let's move it on down to Pavel Zacha, who had a really good year last year. Him and Charlie Coyle were surprisingly good, but it's kind of regressed for him. And you can see here, he did bump up a little bit, but then, jumping back down to earth, back down to almost basically a 33, 34. Shot volume a little bit better at 2.19, but pretty much nothing else to speak of. He does have dual position eligibility, but even with that 11% ownership is high for what he's giving you right now. Speaking of high ownership, Elias Lindholm at 48% is absolutely nuts. But with that said, the shot volume low, the power play numbers are probably the best that you can find in a 12-team league on the waiver wire from this team. The hits are nice, 1.71 hits and 1.19 blocks. At least he's giving you that peripheral floor. He is going to give you exposure to the top 6 and maybe some power play time, but it's been a steady downward trend since basically the beginning of the season. You would hope that a coaching change can turn a player like him around who just hasn't fit in since he came over in the offseason. Now, one of the stories with this team has been their depth. Kastelik's been pretty decent. Frederick had a decent couple games. I believe there was a 2-goal game in there a couple days ago. He's only 4% owned, center right wing, dual eligible. 2.9 hits per game is why you would mainly own him. He does get some penalty minutes as well, as he does drop the mitts every now and then. So if you're in a league with Pims, he's going to help you out there, but not a whole lot offensively, not a whole lot of shot volume, no power play exposure, and he's bottom 6. So keep that in mind as you're thinking about your ads this week. And then in terms of defensemen, you do have Hampus Lindholm, who's potentially available. I'm not sure how productive he would be. I would prefer to have Zadorov with this hits volume, 95th percentile in hits, 2.86 hits per game. So if you're looking for hitters, you've got Frederick, who's a forward dual eligible, who can get you that 2.9 hits per game number. You've got at 19%. And then the offense should be there. He's been a little bit more offensive in other areas, other places, Calgary, Vancouver. He's been more offensive than he is now. Maybe a coaching change gets him going, but again, not a whole lot on the waiver wire for these guys. So with that said, let's turn now to the Montreal Canadiens. Now, these guys have been a little bit better, at least offensively. You've got Nick Suzuki here, 1 point per game, 2.3 shots, 1.1 hits per game, 5 points on the power play. He's pretty much doing what he always does. You also have Cole Caulfield, 12 goals, 16 points in 19 games, one of the leading goal scorers in the league, 7 power play points as well, so he's still getting it done. But obviously, both of those guys are owned up. You also have Slavkovsky, who's about 76% owned. 11 points in 16 is a little bit underwhelming, but 2.6 hits per game does make him relatively relevant right now. And then in terms of some ads this week, one of the guys that I'm looking at is Kirby Dach, who I've noticed in the past has had a good fantasy file. He's got 3 assists, a power play point, 7 shots, and 10 hits in his last 4 games. He's top line, power play 1, 2.1 hits per game, 8 points on the season. You could do a lot worse than that. He's dual position eligible as well, and he has done it in the past. Lane Hudson, he was a earlier play in the season, but 11 points, no goals, not a lot of peripherals, no shot volume, but he has been getting it done on the power play. Brendan Gallagher, 8 goals quietly on the season, 19 games, 8 goals is pretty good. Shot volume a little bit low compared to what he used to do, but with those 3 power play points, he is power play 2, so that's going to help. Caden Gooley is a block specialist, 2.9 blocks, 1.4 hits per game. 6 points in 14 is not bad. It's not great. He's 11% owned, so he could be there for you on the waiver wire. Logan Mailloux in a small sample size, 3 points in 5 games. The peripherals are decent, but he's probably not playing at this point in time, so not a whole lot that you can get. Emil Heineman has at least been hitting. He's been getting an elevated role in the lineup, but only 5 points in 18 games, so maybe not the best ad this week. So as we turn to the player hubs, we'll start it off by looking at Kirby Dach. Shot volume is a touch low, 1.84 is a little bit low for my taste. Power play numbers are decent. He does have a power play point in his last 4 games. 2.05 hits per game is nice. It's a nice peripheral floor for a player to springboard off of. And with this line assignment and the power play 1 exposure, They've broken up that top line. Caulfield now down on the second line. They put Kirby Dach up there to try to spread out the offense. So you could take advantage of that. At 4% ownership, center, right wing, dual eligible. He'd be one of the better adds that you can find this week. And especially in terms of positional flexibility when you're going to need it on those heavy nights. This is a very tough week to find single position eligibility players because they're not going to be as easy to get into your lineup on all those heavy nights. Now, with that said, you do have Brendan Gallagher. The main reason you'd own him is the goal production, 94th percentile there. Really good numbers on the season. He used to be a shot volume guy, not so much anymore, 1.95. Not terrible, but not great either. He is on power play too, so he's going to get you some power play points. The hits used to be there. They're not so much there anymore, but you're getting goal scoring out of him, a decent line assignment, and he should be there for you in pretty much any league size at 2% ownership. But again, a single position right winger, maybe not the best week to grab a single position guy, but if you're just looking for goals, if you're in a goal heavy points league, this would be a guy that you can pick up pretty much in any league size. Now, in terms of defensive adds, we all know about Lane Hutson. It's pretty sporadic in terms of what he does. So he does get some shot blocks, 1.42 blocks. He does get power play points. He's quarterbacking the second power play unit. He's got 4 assists, 2 power play points, and 7 shots in the last 5 games. And you can see the assist numbers are 91st percentile. He just has no goals. His shot volume is abysmally low at 0.89 shots per game, and he doesn't really hit either. So this file looks a little bit like Adam Fox, just with a much lower point per game number. Fox doesn't get a lot of hits, shots, or goals either. So you're getting a lot of the same things, but just a lower overall profile out of Lane Hutson. But in a week where you're getting 4 games at 34%, he could be one of the better options because he is a power play guy, and you might get some power play numbers. So if you're in a points league that weighs power play points heavier, he would be the guy to add. But if you're in a points league or a categories league that you need blocks from, hits and blocks from Caden Gooley, 2.86 blocks, 1.36 hits per game. So that's an area where you're going to look at a volume play like this in a 4-game week for a guy like Gooley, back healthy again after missing some time. 11% owned. He should be there for you in a 12-team league. They do have 2 back-to-backs, which means they're probably going to get hemmed in on those second nights of the back-to-backs, and they're going to need to block a ton of shots, and that's what Caden Gooley is good for. So a couple of different options for you. There are a couple of other guys you can go to. Emil Heineman, I mentioned before. He's relatively low ownership. I just haven't seen enough of him eye test or in terms of the numbers to see whether or not he'd be a good ad for the week, but there are a couple of guys that are available that are in the top 6 and can get you some power play exposure. Up next, let's take a look at probably the best team to choose from this week, and that is actually, before we do that, let's take one look at the news for Patrik Laine. So Laine took the ice in a non-contact sweater Wednesday. This is his first time skating with teammates since his knee injury. Now, he's probably not coming back this week. He might not even be back for 2 weeks, but he is trending in the right direction. So if you're in a huge lead in terms of your league and you're looking to stash somebody on the IR, Laine could be that guy. He's very frustrating to own because he's a very goal-heavy guy, but he can be close to a point-per-game guy. He should get power play time when he's back. And if you're looking for some value, an IR stash right now could be the way to go. However, I will mention there's a ton of injuries right now, and my IR is filled up. I've had to roster guys on my roster that are currently IR because I have too many guys on IR+. So this is a very difficult situation. But if you're in a lead in your league and if you have those spots empty, keep an eye on Patrik Laine and his status as we go forward. But now we'll turn it over to the Vancouver Canucks. Now, they are obviously dealing with a couple of things here. You've got Pettersson, who's actually woken up lately, 13 points in 18, but a lot of those coming in the last couple of games, and his hits and blocks have been decent, even when he wasn't scoring. So that's a nice positive feature. You have Quinn Hughes leading the way at over a point per game, 19 points in 18 games, 3.6 shots per game. That's really nice. You've got Miller and Besser both out. They were both relatively productive when they were in, but that opens up some spots for guys like Connor Garland. 14 points in 18 games, 2.1 shots per game, 4 power play points. Garland is on pace for 63 points this year, so keep that in mind. It could be a career year for Connor Garland, and he's getting top 6 exposure right now. Same with Jake DeBrusk. He's dual position eligible, so that's going to be a little bit more helpful. 10 points in 18 games, 2 power play points, 1.7 shots, 1.7 hits per game. A little bit low, but he is getting nice line assignment right now. Philip Hronek is probably owned up, but he would be one of your better defensive adds in general. 1.8 hits per game. He's been a little bip low in terms of his offensive production, but usually tied at the hip to Quinn Hughes. You've got Pius Suter, who is getting power play one time. That's worth noting. 9 points in 17 games, but only one power play point so far. In terms of the guys that we're going to talk about here, Erik Brannstrom might be your hottest add this week. 1% owned. 2 goals, 2 assists, 4 points, 12 shots, 8 blocks in his last 6 games, and he's available in every league size. So just wanted to highlight him for his extensive play right now. Tyler Myers, usually a good shot blocker, but not a lot in terms of shots or hits or points or power play exposure there. So really not worth mentioning Myers in terms of a player hub, but we will go into the hub of all of the guys that we mentioned here previously. So we'll start it off with Kiefer Sherwood, 35% owned, 2 goals, an assist, 10 shots, and 20 hits in his last 3 games. Let me read that again. 10 shots, 20 hits in his last 3 games. He's averaging 6.39 hits per game, number 1 in the NHL for hits, and that's coming from a forward. I believe he has dual eligibility. I didn't write it down here, but I'm pretty sure he's left wing, right wing eligible. So if you're looking for hits, if you're in a bangers league, he might already be owned up because of this 100th percentile hits coverage, but it's also some offense. So 2.11 shots per game is not bad. The goal numbers are not bad. The assist numbers are a little bit low, but he has been getting a little bit more exposure in the top 6 because of his play, and he will continue to get that with Besser and Miller out. So definitely want to keep your eye on Kiefer Sherwood. If you can't get him, we have Dakota Joshua back in the lineup. He was really good last year. Really a hits guy with some goal coverage and some shot volume. Hasn't taken a shot yet this year, only 4 games back since injury. 1 assist on the year, but 3.5 hits. So he's just starting to find his rhythm, starting to bang the body and get back into his game. When the offense starts to come, that will be the point to pick him up. It may come this week. He's 8% owned, so if you're looking for hits and you can't get Sherwood, you can probably get Joshua. He's dual position eligible as well. Now, another guy who's getting that top 6 exposure that we talked about, Connor Garland, 0.78 points per game, 82nd percentile in goals, 87th in assists. Shot volume at 2.11 is decent. Power play exposure is not that bad. Hits and blocks are not really why you would own him. He has been up and down, and then back down, and then ticking up over the past couple days. But with this line assignment, with this exposure, that would be the main reason to get him. 1 goal, 2 assists, 9 shots in his last 3 games. And eye test, he was a factor in that game I watched against the Rangers the other night. He was all over the ice. He was touching the puck all the time, taking a bunch of shots. So that is definitely somebody that I would have my eye on. The only problem with that is single position eligibility, and he's 28% owned, so he may not be there for you. Now, in terms of flexibility, Jake DeBrusk is probably going to be a little bit better. He is also getting top 6 exposure. 3 goals, 3 assists, 6 points in his last 9 games, line 1 and power play 1. And he had a 5-game point streak from November 2nd to November 12th. And he continued that on for a little bit. He's had no points in his last 2 games. But with that said, he was relatively hot not that long ago. And all 4 of these guys that I just mentioned are in the top 6, and Pettersson and Suter are the centers there. So you could grab Suter. He's relatively low ownership. We briefly mentioned him in that 3D graph section. But with all that said, all of these guys in the top 6 are relatively available in a 12-team league. So there is a lot to choose from this week off the waiver wire. But if you need that defenseman, I did mention Erik Brannstrom. The blocks have been there, 1.13 blocks per game. Everything else has been relatively low, but he has been trending in the right direction the entire season, and that's been shown in some trust from Rick Tocchet. He's been giving him a little bit more minutes and a little bit more responsibility. You can see 4 points, 12 shots, 8 blocks in the last 6 games, so you could do a lot worse than that. Myers hasn't really been going. Hronek has been a little bit underwhelming and is way higher ownership, so maybe your best bet defensively this week would be. Now, because there's a bunch of teams with 4-game weeks, you can find a lot on the waiver wire. We're going to go over a bunch of guys that are in this trending section on the Player Hub. So if you want access to this, it's in the link in the description below. But we'll start it off. Brett Leason, there's a number of guys on this list from Anaheim. There's a number of guys who are relatively low ownership. He's 1% owned. He's been trending up massively since the 13th. 7 points in his last 6 games, 2 goals, 5 assists, a power play point in that span as well. Again, 1% owned. He should be available in every league size. You also have Dmitry Voronkov, usually a little bit more in terms of a hits and goal scoring kind of guy, but he has been scoring goals. So 4 goals, 2 assists, 6 points on the year. All 4 of those goals coming in the last 7 games, 6 points in his last 7. He's also 1% owned. Anthony Richard, he got sent back to the AHL. He was having a nice little stint as well. We've got Marco Kasper from Detroit, getting some power play time, making that count. Shot volume a little bit low. 1.47 hits per game is nice out of him. He's 1% owned. He's got 2 goals, 1 assist, 3 points in his last 6, but all 3 of those on the power play. 14 shots in that span, and in the last 4 games, 2 goals, 1 assist, and 3 power play points. So getting it done even more recently than what this is. This is basically from the 9th to the 23rd. So even more recently, he's been a factor. Now, Alex Killorn, another Duck, you're getting him at 8% ownership. He's a little bit, complete in terms of where he is in terms of all of these metrics, but it is low in general. He has been really low at previous points in the season. However, in his last 6 games, 5 points, 1 goal, 4 assists, 2 power play points, and you're getting 1 goal, 4 assists, 2 power play points in his last 5 games. So even more recently than the 6-game sample size, he's been a factor, and he's been picked up in a couple of the leagues that I'm in. So he's been on people's radar. So definitely worth mentioning him at 8% ownership. You also have Tarasenko, who hasn't been scoring goals, but he has been picking up some assists. So in the last 6 games, 4 assists, 4 points. I believe 2 of those on the power play. So he's relatively available at 10% ownership. He hasn't broken out for goals yet. That's usually what he's known for. So if you want to get out in front of those goals, Detroit definitely needs some goal scoring, so they could potentially look at him. And he's going to get top 6 exposure, maybe power play 2 times. So worth mentioning him at 10%. You also have Connor Geekie. He's 1% owned. The Tampa Bay Lightning brought him over in the deal for Sergachev, and he's been trending up over the last couple of days here from the 20th to the 23rd. And the reason behind that is 3 points in his last 4 games, 1 goal, 2 assists, a power play point, 7 shots, and 8 hits. And then if you take that back even further, it's a little bit longer. It's a shorter sample size. So last 2 games, 1 goal, 2 assists, and 1 power play point. So getting it done more recently than what this sample size is. He's been a nice addition for the Tampa Bay Lightning. Jordan Martinook has been getting it done for a little while now. 86th percentile in terms of goals. Shot volume is not that bad, but trending up since November 2nd. And that's something that we mentioned here in the Hot or Not Players video last week. 14% ownership still, so really under-owned. 7 points in his last 7, but you take that a little bit longer, 9 points in his last 9 games, 6 goals, and 3 assists. So this is one of those plays that I mentioned in that video, trying to look for a hot team and some of the guys that are getting elevated roles on that team. Roslovic was one of those guys. Now it's Martinook who's getting it done for them. So this is a trend I'll be following as we move throughout the season. Now, the opposite of this is Beauvillier. He's a player who's trending up on a bad team. Now, the goal scoring has been there, 81st percentile. Shot volume is not bad at 2.23. He's only 4% owned. He's got 5 points in his last 6 games, 3 goals, 2 assists. He's got 14 hits in that span as well, which is something that I did not necessarily expect out of Beauvillier. So again, 4% owned. He should be there for you as well. Trevor Zegras starting to come alive a little bit here since November 13th. And he's 9% owned, so he's a little bit low ownership. He used to be way higher than that in the past when he was closer to a point per game, but he's getting back towards that pace. So in his last 4 games, 1 goal, 3 assists, 4 points, 1 on the power play, 11 shots, and 6 hits. So getting a little bit more physically involved for Zegras. He should be there for you in a 12-teamer. I mentioned Pius Suter. We'll go over his hub here. 89th percentile in terms of goals, 6 goals on the year in 17 games. Shot volume a little bit low. He does get that power play 1 line assignment, which I mentioned in the Vancouver section. Only 1% owned, 2 goals, 2 assists, 4 points in his last 6 games, 13 shots, 4 hits, 4 blocks in that span as well. So he's available in pretty much every league size, and you're not going to get a lot of top 6, top power play guys at 1% ownership. So dual eligible center left wing, that's also worth noting for Suter. Jaden Schwartz every now and then becomes fantasy relevant. He has been doing that lately. 12 points on the year in 20 games. But if you look recently, he's only 3% owned. 4 points in his last 5 games, 1 goal, 3 assists, a power play point, 17 shots, and 9 blocks in that span. So getting some offense for Seattle, that's something that they need compared to last year where they were not scoring goals at all. So he's been coming up clutch for them, and he's been trending up basically since the 13th. So definitely want to keep an eye on him. He's at 3% ownership. Now, an even lower ownership guy, another Duck, Jackson Lacombe. He's come up and he's made it count. So 2 blocks per game on the season is a nice average. Only 4 points is a little bit low. However, if we look at the last couple of games, in the last 6, he's got 2 goals, 1 assist, 3 points, 13 blocks in that span, along with 9 shots. So he's been a nice blocks guy. If you're in a league with heavy blocks coverage, this is a guy I would have my eye on. We will get to another one of the Ducks in just a little bit. Before I go any further, we do have to touch on Mason Marchment, who had that incredible game. He's over a point per game now because of that 5-point effort that he had not that long ago. And when you factor that in, he's got 10 points in his last 6 games, 4 goals, 6 assists, 16 shots, and 6 hits. But he is relatively high owned in terms of 62%, so might not be there for you in a 12-teamer, maybe there in a 10-teamer, and definitely worth a stream if you have it. Now, again, another Duck that we wanted to touch on, Olin Zellweger. I know a number of the other channels have been talking about him. I might have mentioned him here a week or 2 ago when we were featuring the Ducks. However, power play 1 quarterback, and it has not stopped for him. So only 20% ownership, 5 points in his last 6, 2 goals, 3 assists, 2 power play points. And then if you look at his last 4 games, that's where all those points are coming from. 2 goals, 3 assists, 2 power play points in his last 4. So still really hot, still really low ownership. Definitely want to mention him as we move through here. Another defenseman you could add for some offensive production, but he also had a 5-hit game, which I'm surprised to see. Sam Girard, 2 blocks per game, 1 hit per game. The assist numbers are nice. He's been trending up since the end of October, which is nice to see. He's only 7% owned, 4 points in his last 6, 15 blocks in those 6 games, 8 shots, 9 hits. So he has been getting the peripheral coverage. He is a really skilled defenseman, and you're getting that exposure to guys like Mikko Rantanen, who is also on fire. Rantanen, 11 points in his last 6 games, 7 goals. So to get exposure to a guy like that at 7% ownership for Girard is definitely worth a flyer. Another guy I wanted to touch on, Frank Vetrano, hasn't necessarily broke out in terms of goal scoring, but the hits volume is there, the shot volume is there, and he has been heating up just a touch. So in his last 6 games, 1 goal, 2 assists, 3 points, 19 shots, 23 hits, and 8 blocks. He is 61% owned, but I did want to mention him here as there are a number of Ducks that have been offensively productive, and he's one of them. Now, we move it a little bit further down. You're still getting that nice power play 1 exposure from Stefan Nason. He's dual position eligible. He's 48% owned, and he's still relatively hot. 4 goals, 1 assist, 5 points in his last 6, 3 power play points, 15 shots, 19 hits. So really nice peripheral floor, 2.55 hits per game on the season. The power play numbers are great. The goal scoring's great. He's still really relevant. And the Devils are still rolling along. They're one of the top teams in the Metro, so definitely want that exposure if you're in a shallow league. And then last but not least, we will talk about Yanni Gourde. He's a guy at 2% ownership, 4 points in his last 5, 2 goals, 2 assists, not a whole lot of hits or shots coverage. Hits are not bad at 1.5, but you would like a little bit more. But in terms of low ownership guys, this is another Seattle play. He is relatively available at 2% ownership. So just a couple of guys I wanted to highlight here that are getting it done. If you want to look at some of the guys who are trending in the wrong direction in this side, you can go on to the link in the description below and take a look at this yourself. Some of these guys are still getting it done, but they've trailed off from their historic pace, like Nathan McKinnon, Philip Forsberg, Aho coming back down to earth, Lehkonen. This is a small sample size after he came back from injury. So again, link in the description below. But now, as we turn to the goaltending, just want to shout out Dustin Wolf. He's 69% owned. In his last 4 games, a .966 save percentage, 4 wins, and under 1 goal against average. He just outdueled Igor Shesterkin against the Rangers. 4 straight wins. He's got 5 wins in his last 6 games. Is he taking over the net in Calgary? It seems to be the case, and you can look here. Well above expected, 7.04 above expected, 86th percentile there, .926 save percentage, 2.3 goals against, 8 wins in 11 games, and he's been trending up since the 9th. So he should be on your radar in a shallow league. But if he's not there, there is another starter. I've mentioned him before, Peter Mrazek. He's still getting it done. So the total save volume is really nice, 92nd percentile there, 3.14 goals saved above expected. So that's nice. Even with this team defense, he's still ownable. Only 6 wins in 14 games. That's to be expected because of the team exposure. However, a 956 save percentage in his last 3 games, 1.33 goals against. He's playing pretty much right as I speak, as I'm recording this. They're playing Philadelphia. He's getting the start today. We'll see how that goes, but he has been really a nice goaltender for save volume and overall goaltending skill. His save percentage has been right around this number for the last 2 seasons, so definitely worth an add, especially in a points league where you're getting a point per save. Quickly on Lankinen, he's been dropping off a cliff since the 9th. There has been rumors that Demko could be back in the next 2 weeks, so that is something to keep an eye on as well. Moving on to a guy that I now currently own, David Riddick, the opposite of Lankinen, trending up since November 2nd. He is basically their starter with Kemper out. The team defense is the reason you would own him, 97th percentile for LA's team defense. He is right at expected. Save percentage is low in general. However, over the past couple of games, so in the last 4 games, 926 save percentage, 2 wins in 4 games, 1.56 goals against. So he's getting it done lately, and he's been improving on those numbers. They continue to tick up. So definitely worth mentioning him. He's at 26% ownership. So to get a starter right now on a really good defensive team at 26% ownership, this is what that zero goalie strategy is all about. Finding guys like this when they're hot, when they're rising in this trend graph, and then trying to find those team defense plays. This is a guy who's been getting it done. Another starter that you can potentially get access to, another guy that I also own, is Vejmelka. So as I try to find him as I'm speaking, that's the difficult part. Number 30 on the goaltending hub, well above expected. He did have that incredible game where he made 49 saves. He just does not get wins. 1 win in 8 games, but a 922 save percentage, 2.4 goals against. And if you look in the last 4 games, 942 save percentage, 1.98 goals against. But again, only 1 win in those 4 games. So the good news is the win came in the last 2 weeks. He is starting tonight against Pittsburgh as I'm recording this, so he might, we'll have to see how he does there. But he started the last 4. Connor Ingram is out, and he's at 12% ownership. So another starter that you can get access to. The team defense is nowhere near as good as Riddick's team defense, but with all that said, he should be available in a 12-team league at 12% ownership. Moving forward, moving a little bit down, I guess, on the list, Semyon Varlamov we haven't talked about, but he's just quietly gone about his business. Team defense is right about mid-pack. He's above expected, 1.9 goals saved above expected, 903 save percentage, 3 wins in 8 games. However, if you look at the last 2 games, the last 2 starts that he's had, 947 save percentage, 1.44 goals against, and he's only 37% owned. So Sorokin has been playing really well, but just hasn't gotten the wins. And same could kind of be said about Varlamov. He's been playing really well, hasn't gotten a ton of wins. 968 last game, 923 the game before that, 933 the game before that, 960 before that. So consecutive, not necessarily in a row starts, but every time he's in the net, he's playing really well. The Islanders goaltending has been doing their job. They just need to give them some offensive support. And then last but not least, we will touch on John Gibson, who I will also have to find as I'm speaking. He may or may not be in this list, so let me just clear this out and bring up his name. But Gibson, coming back off of injury, Dostal, it was his net. It was obviously Dostal. Early on in the season, he was one of the top goaltenders on the hub. And you can see here the team defense is atrocious, but he is above expected, 906 save percentage, and 3 wins in 4 games. So he had a 906, 900, 840, and a 950. If you look at the numbers, the raw numbers, they're not that great in terms of goals against and things like that. But he does have those 3 wins in the 4 starts. So if you're getting extra point waiting for wins, he seems to be the guy that's getting it done lately. Dostal does have 1 win in his last 2 starts and a 933. But Dostal's at 60% ownership, while Gibson is at 25%. And he should be the starter just based on historical performance. He used to be the starter. Dostal kind of stole it when he was out with injury, but he should at least take a couple of starts away from Dostal moving forward. Now, we're not going to go through every goaltender on this list, just wanted to give you a little bit of a taste of what you can find. I did have a request to do some of the back-to-backs. There's just so much to go over. I'm not going to have time for that today, but I want to thank you all for watching. As usual, leave your comments down in the comment section below as to who I can pick up. I'm starting to chip away at some wins, but I definitely could still use some help, so leave those in the comment section below. I'll try to get to as many of them as I can. Thanks again, and I'll